Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Tech Done Different. As always, I'm your host, Ted Harrington. And with me here today is our special guest, Jenny Radcliffe. Jenny is also known as the People Hacker. She's a social engineer, and she's the director of social engineering at Human Factor Security. And she's a total badass of a podcast host. So I've appeared on her podcast. I'm excited to have her on mine. So Jenny, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Ted. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you for sure. So let's talk about social engineering today. I mean, you are the guru at it. So I have tons of questions to ask you about this domain, but maybe the place to start would be, could you describe to the audience the mission of a social engineer who does what you do? What's the goal?
Yeah, I mean, so I specialize in two things. So when we're not in the middle of a UK national lockdown, under normal circumstances, I am a physical pen tester, so physical penetration specialist, basically a burglar for hire, and have been since I was a little kid. Always did it with cousins that were perhaps not quite so well behaved as they should have been. And then other than that, it's the psychology. So I really am a social engineer in the purest sense, in that I don't really use that much technology. I use people as my access point. And the goal, it depends. So sometimes the client will give me a goal. I might have to steal something or might have to plant something, which would be standard pen testing kind of that everyone would know about. But the real goal, I suppose, is to show people the art of the possible. So what can be done with improvisation, with tactical thinking, with people and systems on the ground. Really, that's the goal. I suppose my personal goal, is to show that this is as powerful as any technological hack. Because in a way, I don't need to be able to do I mean, I actually am learning some technical bits and pieces. I'm finding it really, really exciting. I never thought I'd learn it, but I put like a little canary token on something today, and I was really pleased with myself. But it's to show that knowing how to work with the computer between our ears is as powerful or more powerful than the tech, and that's really the goal. Because it's so important, it doesn't get forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. I mean, even those of us that do work on the technical side of, hacking challenges, we all say the human is the weakest link, right? And so you're going right to the heart of it. And I love the way you just phrased that, the computer between our ears. And this idea, which I have a feeling that you're going to be giving me a lot of t-shirt ideas that I need to make after today, but the art of the possible, that's such a succinct and beautiful way to describe what you're doing. And I'm inferring from that, and tell me if I'm right or I'm wrong on this, but I'm inferring from that part of what you're doing is you're helping your clients understand what they might not be able to anticipate, right? You're helping show them like, hey, this is how someone could do this. Whereas before they might've been like, we're probably pretty secure. Is that about right? You're changing minds?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, all the tricks that I would use, persuasion and influence tricks and manipulation stuff and negotiation stuff, all those kind of psychological tools are also what we use to make sure that the message hits home within the client. And really, it's coming at things, it's showing them what someone with an attacker mindset can do. Really, I always say, I'm not an angel. I have a talk I give, and I quote Terry Pratchett, and he says, humans are halfway between the fallen angel, where the fallen angel meets the rising ape. And I always say that, we are somewhere in the middle of that. But what I'm trying to show is that what a human can do, what an attacker can do. I'm not an angel, but I'm on the right side. And so it's really good. The way we talk to clients is to say it's really good to have someone who's a good guy, who thinks like a bad guy, but they're your bad guy, And that's really what we're trying to do, is say, like, if I was going to come at you with everything I could think of, this is how I'd do it. And it's hard. It's hard for clients to accept it sometimes. It seems so evil. But like, that's really where we're going with it. We're showing them how they can protect themselves against the worst that's out there, really. And it
Yeah, it's
makes it
amazing.
more human when I put it that way.
Totally.
Right?
Well, you're really good at that. Yeah, communicating it in ways that people can
No, thank you.
conceptualize and understand. And there's so many parallels, of course, between what you do and what we do.
Mm.
And I love the way you just described that, right? It's like it's your bad guy. And that's we often talk about this idea of like we're good guys getting to do bad guy stuff. And that's a lot of what I'm hearing you say as well.
Yeah,
So
it's fun to be the bad guy.
it it is fun to be the bad and not go to jail and not commit
Yeah,
crimes.
exactly.
So when you think about what makes for a good and effective social engineer, you mentioned some of the techniques already, and I'd love to understand them a little bit more. You talked about manipulation and some of these other things. I would imagine quickly establishing trust and rapport are probably important as well. But if you think about the different techniques, I guess, what are the primary ones that come to mind, and how does it work?
Well, I mean, there's a lot that in what you've asked me, because there's really two sides to this. So, in terms of what makes a good social engineer, there are characteristics, right? And not everyone's good at it. Not a physical social engineer, anyway. Not a people social engineer. And I mean, I can talk about that, and then I can tell you about some of the skills that I think people should have. But the characteristics are quite, I think it's quite, I'm quite specific when I'm looking to work with people. And it's things like, it's persistence and flexibility are two of the things. So you've got to be the type of person. So people, I used to be asked, particularly in the early days, I always used to be asked, did you ever get caught, type of thing? Or did you ever fail? And I always say no. And they say, what, you've managed to get past every time? And I go, well, I've got past most times. And the times that I didn't get past, I don't close the file. That file never closes till I get in. And that's what I mean by persistence. There are places where I have not managed to get into yet, but it'll never close. And I'll go to my grave with it open if I don't get past that security. So, so when I'm say persistence, I do genuinely mean persistence. And there's a book that talks about patience that I love. There's a book called Shogun, James Clavell. And in Shogun, the main character, I'm not doing any spoilers here, but the main character wastes 11 years to make his move. And you need that kind of patience to be a really good social engineer as well. So now we've got to be persistent. Now we've got to be patient. And you've got to be flexible. So you need a plan A, B, C, D on the job. So I over prepare. We're very thorough in the plan that we do, and in the heist that we plan, and the way that we're going to do it, and what everyone's going to do. But if on the job something changes, and Mike Tyson says everyone's got a great plan until they're punched in the face or something like that. Someone said it on my podcast the other week, and I thought it was great. As soon as a human comes in, everything changes. You've got to be able to flex and throw everything away. So like those characteristics, that kind of hardware, persistence, patience, flexibility, it's really important that we have those in place, because without those things, I can teach anyone, conversational hypnosis. I can teach them influence and strategies, persuasion techniques, interrogation techniques, body language, lie detection. I can teach you all those things. And we are going to do it. I've written a whole curriculum. It's massive at the moment. It's like a master's course. It's massive at the moment. So whether it comes out in that form, I don't know. All those things are really important as well. But it doesn't matter if you haven't got the right type of person to do that work. You'll just have a toolbox, but you won't really use it. And so there's some of the things that you can learn are only useful. That they're always useful in life, but you'll only be able to put them to the job if you're of a certain personality, I think. Yeah. I don't think everyone can be a social engineer.
Yeah, no, I would think not. And it seems like maybe there are some characteristics that are assumed as baseline to even be considering whether you could do this, let alone whether you'd succeed at it. Some of which I think you've either talked about explicitly or implicitly, but things like well, certainly having a little bit of that malicious mindset, not necessarily being motivated to be malicious, but being able to think like the bad, the bad actor. And then it sounds like, and I'm going to ask this as a question because I think you're saying this, but I haven't explicitly heard you say it. And I'm putting some of my own bias into this too, but it seems like being able to deal with rejection is part of this too, or maybe that's what you're including in part of persistence, but you try something, it doesn't work. How do you keep going?
I mean, I suppose it's I see it's hard for me to say that because I would be the worst person to deal with rejection. That'd be a nightmare. So I don't, but it depends how you classify. But you're right in as much as being able to go away and come back again. So to think of a plan B and to discard, you've got to be able to discard something that doesn't work. So the bias that you sort of got to get over the sunk cost fallacy, which is like, I've put all this time and effort into doing it this way, so I'm going to keep putting time and effort into this, even if clearly this isn't working. That's the sunk cost fallacy. And you need to move away from that and say, everything that now, just clear the table and start something else. And so I'd say in that way, yeah, you're right. I'd say persistent. You could frame it as being able to deal with the fact that you were wrong. You had the wrong plan, the wrong details, the wrong approach, and go back and do it again the next day without, and just discuss the ability. I think I talk about this quite a lot when I still do a lot of high level kind of soft skills and people skills training, although less these days. But the ability to be able to say, this didn't work and I'm done with it, and then move on to the next thing is something I don't see in a lot of people. And I don't see it enough in myself. I mean, I hang on to things, like I say, the file never closes. Yeah. That's a really important characteristic.
Yeah, I love this idea of the file never closes, because that's a really powerful mindset shift, right? Because it also removes failure almost from the equation. I mean, failure in terms of permanent failure, like, yeah, an approach.
You're so right. And that's probably why I say, so when people say, and especially when I first started giving interviews on this, which by now is over a decade ago, and they'd say, oh, did you ever fail? And I'd always say no. But you're right. It's because I was framing it like, well, I'll only fail. I'll never fail because I'll never stop until I get past.
Right. Yeah. You only fail if you're like, well, I'm done and I failed. But
like, in strictly speaking, did you fail? Well, yeah, we didn't get in.
Yeah.
But now, whether you pay me or not, I'm still coming back.
Has that ever happened where you go back later after the scope of a contract?
All the time. If I this is an exclusive, Ted. I've never told anybody this before. I don't think I've ever mentioned this in an interview. But certainly in the UK and generally speaking, wherever I go and do pen tests, physical pen tests, first thing is I leave things, right? I leave things behind. So I have little octopus charms, little silver octopuses, and I put them on the client's desk just to freak them out, because the job lends itself to a certain amount of theatre. But I also tend to leave them in places outside the sites of various jobs for me, right? So it's funny to me to go back and find like a little octopus underneath a street sign or something. Just reminds me I was there. I don't know why I find it so amusing, but I do. And if I am driving past the scene of a former pen test, I will almost inevitably go and have a look around again and just watch it again for 10 minutes or go in again. And I've nipped in and used the bathroom sometimes. I've nipped in and got a coffee out the machine sometimes. Never, not just for my own amusement, really, just to see if they did what I told them to do, which is often not.
I'd love to hear your take on the situation that happened in Iowa last year, the year before. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but I'll just kind of recap it for the members of the audience who might not be familiar with it. But basically what happened was a security company was hired to do a physical penetration test, like what you're talking about, for, I think it was the courthouse or something in Des Moines. And the objective was, can you get into the building, basically? And they had a contract to do this. They were hired to do this project. They wound up doing exactly what they're contracted to do. And once they actually got into the building, they, I can't remember if they called the police or they intentionally triggered an alarm. And then when the police showed up, they said, hey, we're here. Here's our contract. You know, we were hired to do this thing. And they wound up actually getting thrown in jail for a really long time, like months.
Yeah.
And it was this whole like furor that basically boiled down to multiple departments at this organization not knowing, the left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing, and caught in the middle are these security professionals like, I was doing my job. I have a contract that you signed.
Yeah.
What's your take on that whole situation?
Well, I remember giving a talk at the time when they were still in prison. You know, they were in jail for a while, and saying, you know, this could have been any one of us, really. This is a situation where you have to be very careful of the scope of a job, and that has to be crystal clear. And I think sometimes, you know, practitioners get carried away, clients get involved in the story. Now, if I'm training a social engineer, I say, you do not insert yourself into the story unnecessarily. This isn't your story. It's the story of the pen test. It's the story of the break-in. It's not about you, and you've got to leave ego to one side. And if I see someone with a lot of ego as a social engineer on a job, they've got to go, because they'll just take risks and put everyone at risk. And sometimes it's really very dangerous. So there's that. I think this was a case where the ego of the sheriff involved, I believe it was the guy was the sheriff, couldn't handle the fact that they've been breached. Someone has got to be to blame. And this is a problem in business, and it's a problem it's certainly in security pen testing, is the clients either want to restrict your scope and say you'll break into a building this way, or you'll do the test this way, which is not replicating the real life, and is always a bad way of doing things, really, you know, restricting someone too much. And kind of skewing things that way. And then there's the ego of the people who are not let in on it, who don't understand it, and are suddenly, oh my God, you know, these people have got into the courthouse. This is my job. This is my staff's job. And the guy couldn't let that go. And he couldn't let it go. And nothing would have made him let it go, because he knew that that shouldn't have happened on his watch. And I feel sorry for him, but I don't feel nearly as sorry for him as I do for the two poor guys thrown in prison. Right. So to me, it wasn't necessarily negligence on behalf of the company. It wasn't that they get out of jail free card, wasn't particularly effective. It was human factors, again, getting in the way of professionalism and of everything else. I don't think we could have accounted for that. I think it was an extreme reaction, but I think, you know, I've come across security staff who just, they can't handle the fact that we got past. You know, I've been sort of thrown in rooms and kind of roughed up a little bit by security staff who I know knew that we were meant to be there and that we had a pass to being there, but while they had deniability that we were perhaps thieves, they just were a little bit too rough, because it's embarrassing for them. So I don't think when I looked at that case, I didn't think it was necessary that anyone was negligent, really, or that anything was missing. I just think it was the guy just overreacted, and then he couldn't come back. He committed then. So you have to see it through. Meanwhile, our comrades are in jail. I felt very sorry for them.
Yeah, that whole situation was such a nightmare. So as we think about what we might learn from that situation, it's really interesting hearing you describe that part of the challenge is, of course, the human factor, right? The human reaction of the client, maybe some of whom might be unwitting to this thing that's going on, some of whom maybe are witting to it. There's some things that we see in some of the software security type hacking that we do that has some similar themes, and I'm curious to your advice and like how you've dealt with these types of things. But you brought up a couple of times this idea that the client might be embarrassed, and that's a legitimate, real problem. Like, we have people all the time who are like, they refer to their software as their baby, right? And they're like, well, I don't want you coming in here to tell me my baby's ugly. And we had to figure it out, right? Like, how do you make sure that the client feels good about this? Because ultimately, that's what we're all here to do. All security professionals, we're all here. Well, most of us are all here to, help the client improve and get better and, be better tomorrow than today. But if we were to do so in ways that makes them feel bad or embarrassed, that's obviously counter to our mission. So how do you approach that? I mean, obviously, we just talked about this scenario in Iowa that was an extreme case, but in most cases, How do you deal with that?
It's so funny because sometimes I don't like. In some ways, I don't. It's my job to show them where they could be, seriously hurt. Sometimes physically, sometimes financially, reputationally, by someone who was a really bad person or person or persons unknown. So my job is to show them how they can, like you say, how they can improve and how can they be safer. Not necessarily, and I would never necessarily say it was to make them feel good necessarily, which probably is terrible, but I just think, no, as long as they're safe, I've sort of done my job. It's so hard. I mean, what we say is nobody can be fired. So one of the stipulations at the beginning of a assignment would be that nobody in the business can be fired. And the way I sort of say, it's not written anywhere, but I always say on the call or whatever, or in the initial scoping calls, is we're professional con artists. We're going to succeed. Yeah. You cannot blame someone for being conned by a professional con artist. Certainly not if they've had no training and don't expect it at all. And even if they do, my whole life, my whole job, my whole career, everything I do is sharpening those skills to an arrow's point that means I'm going to get past anyone. So, it's not a fair fight. Don't blame the person. That being said, let's try and stop me anyway. Let's try and get it to the point where they try and stop us anyway. And I think that's all you can do is is just say something. We're professionals. It's going to succeed. Great if we don't, but it probably will. Don't worry about it. That's what you're paying for me to do. And then when I present the findings, it's done with humor and sensitivity. I mean, I had a security guard once resign because we've got past and we've fooled him. And I said, bring him back, and he wouldn't come back, and he wouldn't come back. And I said, bring him back. I want to speak to him. And I spoke to him with the boss there. And we went over, and I said, all you did was let us in the building. This guy let us into his life. This is the MD. So he let us into his life. He let us into his computer, into his email. We were in his phone. And, and I said, you're all you did was let us into a building with a good reason. There was a really good reason that you did that. And you were fooled 6 or 7 different levels. But this guy told us, his password.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have done that, would you? And he was like, no. And I said, we'll get all of you whatever way we can get. Yeah, I can be got to. And that's when I say, we can all be got to. So don't worry about it. But now we're going to train you. Now we're going to tell you how to harden this off. And hopefully, when we come back next year, you won't let me in again.
Right,
now, if you let me in again, now you're worried. Now I'm annoyed.
You're right. Because it didn't. The point wasn't adopted or addressed. Yeah. What you just said is really interesting. This idea we can all get got, or you said it's something like that. I might have just butchered your words, but even security professionals, we can succumb to these types of things. And one of the things that I think is interesting is we look at some of the headlines that have been happening recently with security companies themselves being victims of major security breaches. And the response to that seems to fall into really only 2 categories. The majority category is total blaming, like total victim blaming, like, oh, that's so embarrassing. Security company gets, hacked or whatever. And then the others who are like basically what you said, which is, look, this is hard. This is a battle. Like, we should be helping these people, not embarrassing them. And I'm curious to what your take is on that. When we see security companies themselves become victimized, how should people think about that?
Well, I mean, everybody wants a crack at the champ, right? I mean, that's how, that was what it was put to me when I was talking about, someone asked me, did I ever get socially engineered? And I got socially engineered once or twice, and I was given an example. And I said, they want it to be that they've got to me. And that's on a tiny scale compared to huge companies where people are going to go in and try. I think one of the problems is arrogance will get you. So we're big, we're well funded, or long in the tooth, being at the game. The minute that you say, I'll probably spot it, they're going to get past, because what you've got is different minds, fresher minds, different perspectives, diversity in the attacking, in the threat actors and the malicious actors and the attacking community, if you like. There's massive diversity of thinking. So unless it's a race all the time, we're trying to keep up with it, we're trying to match it, we're trying to prevent it. And so you've got to expect it to happen. And of course, they're going to go for some of the big guys and some of the, I always remember there was, what were they called? Was it Hacker Team? And they DDoS the website and turned it to Hacked. So there was a company called Hacker Team. I think it was Hacker Team. They turned it to Hacked, just to show that they got to them. So, people are going to want to do that. So sometimes you're only in it to show that you can, to show the art of the possible. And if you look at something like the SolarWinds breach, which you didn't bring up, but I am, if you're looking at something like the SolarWinds breach and everything that went with that, there was 18,000 different companies, organizations, agencies affected at a minimum. And of course, if you're going to use software that broadly, you're going to pull into it some of the companies that are in charge of that software or updating it, who've created it. I think it's how people react. It's what they do next that people judge them on. It's how do you admit it? Are you honest? Are you transparent? Those are they're the things that I think the industry judges companies on, and will continue to do so. But what you perceive to be the right course of action, and who really can say what the right course of action was. And just to give you an example of that, when talking about there was the recent Microsoft Exchange hack, and I was talking to someone. I do a chat show, and she's like a live chat show, and I was talking about the fact that the Microsoft were aware. We know now that they were aware. Brian Krebs did a timeline. They were aware of activity that became, this Microsoft Exchange server hack from Hafnium. They were aware of that in January, but they didn't declare anything till March. They didn't put the patch out. Well, they had a reason for not doing that. They're not doing that because they want to cause problems, and so we don't know always what goes on as to why companies react like they do and what they have to keep back either. So I'm very careful not to judge. I'm not quick to judge when people are hacked. I think the industry, we are all on the same side. We should all be on the same side, which is we're in defense as opposed to attack. Right. And therefore we really should support each other as much as we can, I think.
I'm totally 100% with you on that. I totally agreed. And it's really interesting, the observation that you just made about how the reaction that a breached or company, the reaction that they have is often the thing that should be judged more than whether or not they were breached. And I look at what Zoom went through last year. Zoom obviously exploded on the scene because of the pandemic. And then it was just like endless security challenges for a series of months. But I really liked their response to that. The CEO was really transparent about here's what our challenges are. Here's what we're doing next. They went out and they hired multiple security assessment companies. They didn't hire ours, which was, they didn't reach out to me. Where was I? But, joking aside, I liked that they went and they got credible companies to come help them. They hired a CISO who then hired a whole team. And that was pretty cool to watch, even though they were clearly stumbling. They were stumbling forward, right?
Absolutely. And I think you're so right with it. I thought they handled it with elegance and with a certain amount of grace, and they improved. And the thing for me was always, yes, there are challenges from Zoom's side of things, which they, like I say, they address very well. But the main thing was education and user education. We have people in the UK who were, primary school teachers, so young kids teachers. Excuse me, edit this out. Young kids teachers, and they were putting the Zoom password and code up on Twitter, and then of course inevitably, some of the worst people in the world turn up on the classroom Zoom. That's not Zoom's fault. Right. That's user error due to this being a new platform and them having to quickly push out messages. And in the midst of that first confusion, when everybody suddenly switched to videos, I remember not long ago speaking to a colleague of mine and going, how do I do Zoom? 2018 or something. What Zoom? What? Oh, can't be bothered with Zoom. Let's just do a FaceTime. And now it's like, it's inconceivable that you wouldn't understand that. But there were people who have got nothing to do with security, not technical at all. And all they know is, well, what's the quickest way? In the middle of the chaos of that first lockdown in the UK and elsewhere, what's the quickest way for me to tell people? And then, first of all, it's public knowledge what the password is. And then behind them, if you look behind me, so right now, if you're looking at me right now, you can see that I've got the company logo in the background. If I take this off, and I'll just do it so that you can see, there is nothing in my background. Why? Because I'm a social engineer, and I do not have any information in the background. Oops, let me just come back. You can edit this. Of course not, because I'm not going to put like a bloody bank statement or something up in the background, right? But people didn't know that. There you go. So, oops, you can just see my counter, which is, whoops, moving like that. And that's the angle of the camera most of the time. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
so nobody can see nothing.
Not even.
And
like
so if you get, and so if you go on to like Rate My Room or something on Twitter, like, so I'll come back with human factor, because it's boring. Rate My Room or Drake My Room really badly, because there's just nothing in the background that you can see. All you could see there is just a little counter with a bit of writing on it. And that's gone. Okay. But people were putting, like, they had their family photographs and addresses, and people who are not in the industry don't understand the way that we can get stuff. So on OSINT, we've got OSINT information from the reflection in someone's sunglasses. So a TripAdvisor post, a wine glass, red wine, which is better for reflections and photographs than white wine, picture of the wine, picture of the place of tapas that they were eating with their little review, found their user details, that it was a shared username. They'd reviewed on TripAdvisor, and we were looking to see an associate. And in the reflection on their wine glass, we could see an IC1 male that seemed to fit that profile. Now, they're not going to know that. And this is something that I would say, is that we're expecting users to keep up with some of these security threats and techniques. They're not going to keep up with them, Ted. It's not a fair fight. I mean, I was reading an article the other day that said phishing is going to be replaced by account takeover attacks soon. Like, credible companies that we firmly believe it. Well, we've only just got users familiar with phishing. Yeah. And now we're going to tell them that doesn't matter anyway, because someone's going to get your account, even though it's probably blended. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, I can't imagine a future where phishing or social engineering don't exist.
It's always existed.
Yeah,
it's the oldest trick in the book, and it's the newest kid on the block. I've always said it. On the one hand, ever since there was two humans, and one of them had something that the other one wanted but didn't want to work for, there's been social engineering and deception. But also, I'm hearing just yesterday of new scripts and new schemes about vaccination programs and about the census that we've got in the UK, which is very, very new. It is never going away, because ultimately what all of this is about is deception. And deception is innate for human beings. It's a social lubricant. Without it, we'd never survive.
And human beings, we fundamentally have vulnerabilities. We have hopes and dreams and fears and aspirations and all these things. And attackers know how to exploit and take advantage of those, the way we're wired as people, right?
Right. I mean, so everyone, we call pursuit and avoidance, right? What you pursue, what you avoid. Put the two together, carrot and stick, and you're going to catch someone. Just take it, raise that emotional temperature a little bit, kick the logic off the cliff, and now off you go. Now you've got a really potent little mix that you're going to grab someone on.
I love it.
It's instinctive to a criminal.
Well, Jenny, you're a font of wisdom. Thank you so much for sharing all these ideas with us today. As we wrap up here, from your viewpoint, how do you think, there's one last question here. How do you think social engineering is going to change in the next 12 or 24 months?
Joe, it's funny, isn't it? Because like I've just said, in some ways it'll change and it'll adapt, and it'll take, whatever new technology comes in, social engineering is going to take it, and it's going to use it, and it's going to use it to create victims and new new breaches and exploits. So in some ways, it'll change with the tech and with the story. So what social engineering does so, in a way, beautifully, but in a tragically beautiful way, is take whatever the narrative of the times is, the zeitgeist, and it'll wrap it up. So, you know, there was social engineering exploits after the war that was to do with, you know, troops coming home. And the social engineering now to do with going back into the workplace and to hybrid work models, because that's where we are now. So in some ways, it'll always adapt to whatever's going on. But what'll stay the same, and you've just hit on it yourself, is human beings will pursue things and avoid things. Human beings will get emotional, and when they're emotional, they're not logical anymore. Human beings will covet things that they don't want to work for and can't afford, and those things stay the same. So what I always say is, it's the oldest trick, it's the newest trick, it's human nature. And it'll be our downfall, but it's humans that defeat humans. It's humans that defeat social engineering. So with the right tech and the right technology behind us to enable it to be easier to spot, and the right sort of education and knowledge, we'll keep on defeating it as well. And that's really what will happen over the next few years. You'll see loads more, and we'll keep on defeating it, and we just keep going because we don't close the file on it ever.
I love it. What a note to end on. Humans defeat humans. So I think the world is lucky to have you, Jenny, out in the world trying to make it so that humans can defend against other humans. So thank you so much for being with us here today.
Oh, no, my pleasure, Ted. Really, thanks a lot for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody else, if you want to learn more about this episode or request to appear as a guest yourself, just head over to tedharrington.com/podcast, and we'll catch you next time.